Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
The young woman saw her husband off as he went to help his sick aunt. Though she trusted him, this time, a sense of impending trouble gripped her. The aunt had always been peculiar, very suspicious and secretive, but she was still family. Bored in solitude, the woman decided to watch the recording of her wedding. In the video, right behind the newlyweds, that very aunt stood before a stranger, handing him an unknown envelope. Confused, she rushed to the village, and as she approached the aunt's house, she saw that same stranger in the yard. And what she overheard completely rooted her to the ground. Alina lay on the couch, tucking a pillow under her side, and turned on the TV. It was her long-awaited day off. The week had been rough: inspections, reports, meetings. The end of the quarter was the busiest time for economists. But right now, lying in front of the TV, Alina had no idea that very soon she would have to go through a lot, precisely because of money. For now, how nice it was just to lie there, watching her favorite series, without a care in the world. Nicholas, her husband, had gone to the village to visit his aunt. Lately, she had been unwell, with an old diagnosis flaring up. Treatment required money. Medications and procedures were expensive, but Nicholas spared nothing for a beloved and dear person. After all, Aunt Nina wasn't just a close relative, she had raised Nicholas. She had supported him when his parents perished in a factory fire while working the night shift. She had taken him in, comforted him, and become both mother and father to him. She had raised her nephew and helped him stand on his own feet. When the tragedy happened, Nicholas was only 10 years old. Still just a child. He had spent the night alone, as often happened when both parents worked night shifts. Nicholas wasn't afraid, he was used to it. In the morning, his grandmother woke him up. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red and swollen from tears. The boy immediately understood something terrible had happened. And it had. The first few days after the tragedy, Nicholas stayed with his grandparents. Then Aunt Nina returned from a business trip and took the boy in. Alina, of course, knew Aunt Nina. She was not an old woman yet, smiling, friendly, but somewhat secretive. Still, that didn't matter. What mattered was that she was a good person. She always sincerely tried to help, constantly sending food from the village: eggs, cottage cheese, milk. You couldn't buy such things in the city. It was just a pity that her old illness had returned, her heart. So now she was undergoing treatment. Nicholas, ever the caring nephew, never abandoned her and helped her in every way. Alina liked that about him. She liked that her husband was so reliable and sensitive. He treated her the same way. Alina and Nicholas met a little less than 2 years ago. It happened on the eve of New Year's. The company where Alina worked as an economist was celebrating the upcoming holiday at a restaurant. The same restaurant hosted the corporate party for the factory where Nicholas worked as an engineer. Initially, the groups didn't mingle, their tables were set in different corners of the hall, and the host worked both sides. But then, whether people relaxed, the alcohol took effect, or the DJ orchestrated an energetic dance mix, the guests somehow blended together. Nicholas, a handsome, tall young man in a black shirt and pressed trousers, invited Alina to a slow dance. She gladly agreed. First, she found him attractive, stylish, fit, athletic, with beautiful dark eyes, sharp cheekbones, and a strong chin. Alina liked that type. Second, she needed any excuse to avoid dancing with Valentine, the head of the sales department. Pudgy, though still young, always sweaty, somewhat unpleasant. Yet, their colleagues kept trying to set them up, two young, single people. Valentine didn't mind at all and had been hovering around Alina all evening. She didn't know how to shake him off anymore, joking, making up excuses. She couldn't outright reject Valentine, though she wanted to. After all, they were colleagues, and he wasn't an insignificant figure in the company. It was an awkward situation. So Nicholas's invitation became Alina's way out, her salvation, even. While dancing, they talked and got to know each other. From the very first moment, Alina liked everything about Nicholas, his voice, his way of speaking, even his scent. She felt drawn to him, and when she met his gaze, she realized he was just as captivated by her. There was so much admiration and tenderness in his eyes. Alina's head even spun a little. She immediately forgot about Valentine and his persistent advances. Now, there was only one person in the world for her, Nicholas. After the dance, they went out to the balcony together, wrapping themselves in warm blankets, gazing at the nighttime city sparkling with festive lights. They talked, getting to know each other better. Soon, it became obvious to both of them this was the beginning of something big, serious, beautiful. Naturally, they exchanged phone numbers. They left the restaurant together in the same taxi. Nicholas didn't make a single improper move. Alina herself leaned against him in the car. He immediately wrapped his arm around her, as if he had been waiting for this moment. A wave of goosebumps ran over her body. She had never reacted to touch like that before. Of course, they started dating. Nicholas always found something interesting to do together, visiting exhibitions, traveling to tourist spots Alina hadn't even known existed, attending concerts. Their music tastes matched perfectly. Alina wasn't even surprised when she realized this. She had sensed it back in the restaurant, that they were meant for each other, two halves of a whole. Alina had stopped believing that such things happened. She was almost 30. Of course, she had had relationships before meeting Nicholas. She had even lived with one of her exes, lasting about a year, but she always ended up disappointed in her partners. She noticed something unpleasant, off-putting right away, those little warning bells from the start. But she thought, no one's perfect. Love grows over time. You just need to adjust to each other. Yet, the result was always the same: disillusionment, breakups, tears. With Nicholas, it was different. Even things that usually annoyed her in people seemed endearing, amusing, sweet when it came to him. Nicholas loved singing in the shower, often hung his t-shirts on the door, and dedicated a lot of time and energy to work. Alina wouldn't have forgiven these habits in anyone else, but she accepted Nicholas completely as he was and loved him with all her heart. He treated her with the same tenderness and care. Alina had never felt so cherished, so loved. It was a wonderful feeling. They were happy together, so before long, they moved in together, living in Nicholas's apartment, which he had recently paid off. A spacious two-bedroom place in the city center, stylish, cozy, beautifully renovated. They were very, very happy together. Alina's parents didn't object to their daughter's choice. In fact, they both really liked Nicholas. And why wouldn't they? His life story inspired involuntary respect. At such a young age, he had achieved so much completely on his own. Alina knew that Nicholas had a difficult life. He lost his parents in childhood and was raised by his aunt, his mother's sister. Aunt Nina worked in the local administration and lived alone at the time of the tragedy. She had already divorced her unfaithful husband, who had a longtime mistress and eventually left for her. The couple had no children, which made the separation easier. Their first and only child, a baby girl, died in the maternity ward almost immediately after birth, and no other children followed. Aunt Nina had always loved her nephew, so there was never a question of who would raise the boy after his parents' deaths. She took him in immediately and later officially obtained custody. They lived well, in perfect harmony. There was complete understanding between the aunt and her nephew. They supported each other, helped one another, and often had heartfelt conversations. Nicholas could be completely open with his aunt, knowing she would always understand him. Aunt Nina never remarried, not because of Nicholas, but because she simply didn't want to. She always said she'd had enough of marriage. I've been there, and I didn't like it. She dedicated all her energy to her work and to her nephew, who showed great promise. He was the best student in school, always did his homework, got top marks on tests, participated in academic competitions, and even played sports. There was a basketball team in their village school, and Nicholas enjoyed playing. But his true strengths lay in the sciences, physics, and mathematics. By the time he was in high school, he had already decided to become an engineer. His aunt supported him completely. She found information about universities and entrance exams that required preparation from an early stage. However, she couldn't afford private tutors. Her salary was decent, but not enough for that. Lessons with instructors who prepared students for such prestigious programs were expensive. So Nicholas studied on his own, devouring textbooks, searching for information online, and finding free courses where he could. He worked tirelessly. In the end, it all paid off. He got into the exact university program he had dreamed of, received a room in the student dormitory as a non-local, and began a new life. Aunt Nina was so proud that she even cried when she saw his name on the list of admitted students. "I never doubted you. I always knew you would go far." She wiped her tears with a handkerchief while Nicholas smiled, anticipating the new opportunities ahead. He hugged his aunt, whom he had long since outgrown. He enjoyed his studies, and they came easily to him. So much so that he even had time for part-time jobs and occasionally attended student parties. No, Nicholas wasn't a regular at such events, but he also didn't completely deprive himself of fun. At first, he visited his aunt every weekend. But then life got busier, and the city pulled him in. Still, they spoke on the phone every day. Nicholas worried about her, knowing about her heart problems. It had all started long ago, back when Aunt Nina lost her much-wanted child. At that time, Nicholas's parents were still alive. He was just a little boy, but he remembered how concerned his mother was for her sister. "Nina is in a terrible state," she whispered to his father. "Not only has she driven herself to a heart attack, but she's also lost touch with reality. She insists her daughter is alive, that someone took her away and sold her to a rich family. How could she be alive?" His father replied, "Babies born that early don't survive." Nicholas knew that his cousin had been born too prematurely and hadn't made it. And Aunt Nina, well, even years later, she sometimes still spoke about her daughter. Over time, she accepted what had happened, but she often read stories about premature babies who survived. She even shared those articles with Nicholas. "Aunt Nina, they have advanced equipment and medications now. When your baby was born, there weren't even incubators in village hospitals. That's why it happened the way it did." "Yes, you're right," she nodded. Her mental state had stabilized quickly back then, but her heart never fully recovered. The disease flared up from time to time, and Nicholas worried about her. Alina met Aunt Nina after Nicholas proposed to her. They went to visit her together. The woman welcomed them warmly, setting a lavish table, looking at her nephew and his fiancée with kind eyes, trying to please them. It was clear how happy she was that Nicholas was finally getting married. "I've heard so much about you from him," Aunt Nina said, shaking her head. It was obvious right away, Nicholas was in love at last. "I'm so happy for you both. You'll be happy together, I can feel it." Aunt Nina was a sincere and warm person, yet from their very first meeting, Alina sensed that she was hiding something. There were subtle signs: nervousness, anxiety. She was trying too hard to seem calm and at peace, but it wasn't entirely convincing. Nicholas, however, noticed nothing, and Alina chose not to ask unnecessary questions. Maybe it was just her imagination. The wedding was large, not overly lavish, but warm and heartfelt. They rented a banquet hall and invited guests. Nicholas's family turned out to be large, many aunts and uncles, their children, and even grandchildren. They were all kind and pleasant people, though Alina hadn't met most of them before. That was fine, they got acquainted right at the wedding. The same was true for Alina's relatives. Nicholas was well acquainted only with her parents and grandmother, but her other close family members also took a liking to him. The celebration was filled with friends, lively contests, energetic dances, and touching moments that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Then came the honeymoon. The newlyweds spent 10 days at a tropical resort, a paradise of turquoise ocean waves, soft white sand, exotic sweet fruits, and cheerful, happy people. It was like a fairy tale. They didn't want to return home, but work awaited them both, and Nicholas worried about his aunt. Aunt Nina's health was worsening. She tried not to complain, but she didn't have enough money for treatment. She had long since retired, and pensions didn't go far. That's why Nicholas helped her. He didn't hide it from Alina. What a situation, Alina's friend and co-worker, Irina, scoffed. You don't have a mother-in-law, yet your husband still spends money like he has two families. I wouldn't allow my Andre to use our joint budget to help his mother. No way. We have our own family, they have theirs. But Aunt Nina raised him, argued Alina. She is like a mother to him. And what if, in old age, you find yourself in the same position, and your sons, into whom you're investing so much now, tell you that they have their own families? Irina scoffed dismissively. There was no convincing her. And Alina? She understood that her husband was doing the right thing. If Nicholas had suddenly turned his back on his aunt, leaving her alone in her time of need, then she would have seriously questioned the kind of man she had married. But instead, his actions earned her respect. Besides, Nicholas had enough time and money for everything, his aunt and his beloved wife. The only thing was that today, they had planned a romantic date. Yes, they had been living together for a while, but they still made time for dates now and then. This weekend, they had planned to go to the movies, have dinner at a cafe, and take a walk along the waterfront. But then, Aunt Nina didn't even call herself, her neighbor did, to say that she wasn't feeling well. Nicholas, of course, became worried, packed his things, and left to check on her. Alina had wanted to go with him, but her husband assured her it wasn't necessary. He didn't want to burden her with his problems. You should rest instead. Order yourself something nice, watch some TV. You deserve it. This week was insane for you. I'll be back in the evening, and we'll go out then. We'll still have time. Alina nodded. Yes, she was a little disappointed that she would have to spend her day off alone. Who likes having their plans ruined? But the reason was valid. More than valid. And she really could spend the day relaxing, watching her favorite show on the couch, taking a bath. Maybe, if she felt like it, she could even go shopping and buy some new office clothes. It was about time she refreshed her wardrobe. So now Alina was lying on the couch, trying to unwind. But the movie's plot didn't grip her. It seemed silly, forced, too predictable. The characters were overly sweet, their lives felt artificial, and the acting left much to be desired. How had she ever liked this before? She picked up the remote and flipped through the channels, nothing interesting. Then, an idea popped into her head. What if she rewatched the wedding video? Everyone had loved the videographer's work. It turned out to be a fantastic film. Alina had loved how she looked in those shots. She looked like a real movie star. The perfect dress, the beautiful contrast between her tan skin and the white fabric, and Nicholas, just as dashing, handsome, and happy. Everyone had said they were a dazzling couple. And the guests' faces? The videographer had managed to capture them in moments of pure, genuine emotion. Some shots were incredibly touching. A true professional had worked with them. Alina opened the wedding video file, one she truly loved. She had watched it many times, with family, with friends. But she had never watched it alone before. Now she wanted to take a closer look, to notice details she might have missed before. The filming was excellent, high quality. Alina had no regrets about the hefty sum they had paid for the videographer's work. Nicholas had found this professional through reviews. Initially, he was booked on their wedding date, and Alina had been disappointed. She couldn't imagine anyone else filming their wedding after seeing his work. But somehow, Nicholas had worked his magic, convinced the videographer to postpone his vacation and take their job. And now, they had this beautiful film. Alina watched herself with pleasure. She truly looked like a fairy tale princess, and beside her was him, her attentive and caring prince, her beloved husband. The wedding had been joyful and warm. Guests laughed a lot, danced, got to know each other. Fun contests, energetic dancing, smiles everywhere. And then Alina noticed something she hadn't seen in any of her previous viewings. Which wasn't surprising. What caught her attention had been captured by accident. In the center of the frame, Nicholas's uncle was dancing wildly in a ridiculous baby costume, drawing all the attention. But just behind him, near the door, an odd scene was unfolding. Something about it felt unnatural, even unsettling. Alina paused the video, rewound, rewatched, then played it again in slow motion with maximum zoom. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Aunt Nina was standing near the door, talking to a young man, a good-looking one, blonde, tanned, with blue eyes. But he wasn't dressed for a wedding, just a t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. He was staring at Aunt Nina with an intense look, almost drilling into her with his eyes. She, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable, hunched over slightly, as if trying to make herself smaller, almost pleading with him. In her hands was an envelope, the kind usually used for cash gifts. Aunt Nina had been in charge of keeping the wedding money safe, making sure the guests' gifts were secure. So it made sense for her to have one of those envelopes. The young man said something brief. Aunt Nina replied, or rather, asked something. He shook his head. Then, she handed him the envelope. He quickly stuffed it into his jeans pocket. Their conversation seemed to continue, but the camera angle shifted, and they were no longer in the frame. What the hell was that? Alina asked herself. She kept watching the wedding film that she had loved so much, but now she wasn't enjoying the happy faces of the guests, nor smiling at the fun contests. She was searching for that man among the guests, hoping to catch another glimpse of him. Why had Aunt Nina given him that envelope? Who was he? There were so many questions, but no answers. The most obvious explanation was that he was one of the wedding staff. That's why Alina didn't remember him, why he wasn't in any of the group wedding photos. But if that were the case, then Nicholas should have been the one handling all the arrangements and payments, not his aunt. Nicholas had planned the entire wedding, and Aunt Nina hadn't been involved at all. She had come from the village as a guest, along with her siblings. Besides, their body language was off. The man seemed to be either threatening or scolding Aunt Nina, and she looked afraid of him. Yet at the same time, she needed something from him. She was trying to appease him, to get him to talk. A very strange scene indeed. Alina frowned. Something was definitely wrong here. Her good mood disappeared instantly. She no longer wanted to watch the video or indulge in pleasant memories. At first glance, Aunt Nina's actions seemed despicable. She had taken money from the wedding gifts and given it to a stranger without even asking the newlyweds for permission or at least informing Nicholas afterward. Although, maybe Nicholas knew about it. Then why hadn't he told his wife? He knew that Alina would always understand, always support him. They had never kept secrets from each other before. It was strange behavior. Alina took a deep breath. She didn't want to think badly of Nicholas's relatives, let alone of him, but the nagging thoughts wouldn't go away. I won't judge anyone in advance, she said out loud. That's not right. I need to figure out what's going on first, then draw conclusions. Figure it out, but how? Should she ask her husband directly? But would he tell the truth, or would he start dodging the question? That was something Alina wouldn't be able to handle. She couldn't keep this to herself anymore. She dialed her friend Sandra. They had known each other since childhood and could talk about anything openly and honestly. I don't know, Sandra said after listening to Alina. It sounds like you might be overthinking this. Overthinking? I saw it with my own eyes. Aunt Nina handed our envelope full of money to that man with those shifty eyes. Are you sure it was your envelope? Maybe it wasn't, maybe you just imagined it. Although, knowing your intuition. Sandra had mentioned one of Alina's strongest qualities, something she'd had since childhood, an incredible attention to detail. Alina often noticed things others overlooked. Alejandro would always joke that Alina would make an excellent detective if only she had the nerves of steel and cold-bloodedness necessary for the job. I can't get that scene out of my head, Alina confessed. It's all I think about. I don't even know what to do. Why don't you just call Aunt Nina and ask her straight up? Say you noticed something odd while watching the video. I don't know, that seems too direct. And if it's some kind of secret, she'll probably just make something up and deny it. You know, Aunt Nina is a good person, but she's always been a bit secretive, distant. Now I'm certain she's hiding something. Well, then go to the village and talk to her in person. It's much harder to lie face to face, and you'll be able to tell if she's being dishonest. The problem is, she has heart issues. I don't want to upset her over nothing. I don't know, if I were you, I'd still go. Just say you came to visit, and maybe you'll figure things out casually. Keep an eye on her. You're probably right. I'll go right now. I don't think you have to rush. Why wait? Alina really started getting ready to leave for the village. She knew the way well, she and Nicholas had been there a few times. And if she got lost, she could always use GPS. She felt lighter inside. No matter what anyone said, having a plan gave her strength and energy. Taking action felt much better than sitting around and making up wild theories. What would she say to Aunt Nina? She hadn't figured that out yet, but she was sure she'd handle it on the spot. The only issue was that she probably wouldn't get to speak with Aunt Nina alone. Nicholas was there. And if they were hiding something from her together, it would be hard to get the truth out of them. But at least she could try. Alina's new car sped down the country highway. She rolled down the windows, letting the fresh air swirl through the cabin. She loved the feeling of the wind in her hair. The stereo played her favorite songs, and she sang along happily. Her mood had improved dramatically. She enjoyed the rural landscapes. Spring had long since awakened nature, and the fields were bursting with bright flowers. It was so beautiful that if Alina were a painter, she would have captured it all on canvas. And there it was, the turn to the village. But what was this? From a distance, Alina spotted her husband's car. It turned right and sped off toward the neighboring villages, further down the road. Nicholas clearly hadn't seen her, but she had definitely spotted his vehicle. Where was he going? Most likely to Techo Nuevo. That's where Aunt Nina's sister lived, another of Nicholas's aunts. He was probably going to pick her up and bring her to visit Aunt Nina. What luck! That meant Alina wouldn't have any interruptions. She would get to speak with Aunt Nina alone after all. She parked outside the village, in an open field with plenty of space. The walk to the house was short, just 200 meters. And after the long drive, stretching her legs would be nice. There was the familiar house. Alina approached the gate and was about to press the doorbell when she heard Aunt Nina's voice. She was speaking quietly but clearly. Alina could make out every word. "I don't have any more money right now," the woman said to an unseen interlocutor. For some reason, this phrase made Alina freeze. She hesitated, then instinctively decided to listen. "Well, you understand," a young male voice replied, "no money, no information." Alina peeked through a small gap in the fence and saw them, Aunt Nina, pale, anxious, flustered, and him, the same young, brooding man from the wedding video, the one she had handed the envelope of money to. What a coincidence. "I know, but Paulo, I've already given you all my savings," Aunt Nina's voice trembled. "Now I'm pulling money from my nephew. Do you think that's easy for me?" "Well, that's for you to decide. You have to set your priorities," Paulo shrugged. "What's more important to you, finding out more about your daughter or leaving your nephew alone? He doesn't seem to be struggling financially, and let's not forget, he owes his success to you. It's just time for him to start paying his debts." "I have to lie to him," and Nina lowered her head. "I tell him I need the money for medical treatment." "That's a great excuse. Sounds believable and logical. We used to be so honest with each other. It's so hard to live like this, in lies. When will you tell me where my daughter is? I spent years thinking she was dead. I have to see her." Alina froze in shock. Daughter. Nicholas had told her that his aunt had given birth to a baby girl many years ago. The delivery was complicated and far too early. The child didn't survive. The woman had struggled for a long time to accept that her little girl was truly gone, nearly lost her mind, but eventually she seemed to have come to terms with it. And now it turned out that the daughter was actually alive? Or what was even happening? And why was this man demanding money from Aunt Nina? Everything in its own time, Paulo shook his head. If everything goes according to plan, you will meet her. But only if you listen to me. The money must be with me in a week and a half. That's enough time to gather it. And then I'll bring you her photos, some from childhood and a recent one. You'll know what she looks like. Aunt Nina clutched her chest and turned even paler. Tears welled up in her eyes, red blotches appearing on her cheeks. Is this true? She looked at him hopefully. He gave a short nod. I have to go. Paulo, let me walk you out through the back gate. Just in case Nicholas comes back. We don't need any unnecessary questions. That's the right decision, the man praised her. You need to keep everything a secret. Otherwise, I'll disappear. I'll vanish from your life, and you'll never learn anything else about your daughter. You won't know her name, where she lives, where she works. And finding her will be impossible. Paulo, I won't tell anyone, Aunt Nina assured him. The pair disappeared behind the house, while Alina stood frozen by the gate, trying to process what she had just heard. The whole thing was so strange, so terrifying that she couldn't wrap her head around it. One thing Alina knew for certain, Aunt Nina mustn't realize that her nephew's wife had overheard her conversation with Paulo or even knew of his existence. Aunt Nina was already too frightened and confused. And this Paulo, he had a special hold over her, he clearly had power over her. Look how she paled and blushed at his words. If this kept up, she might really need that money for medical treatment. So, Aunt Nina was paying Paulo. For what? Apparently, for information about the daughter she had lost so many years ago. But how did Paulo even know about this child? Was it really true that the girl had survived? And where was she now, this grown woman? Nicholas. He was the one Alina had to tell everything to. Together, they would decide what to do because it seemed Aunt Nina had gotten herself into a dangerous situation and wouldn't be able to get out on her own. Alina waited a few more minutes, then pressed the doorbell. Aunt Nina opened the gate. She still looked a bit pale, but Alina didn't let it show that she was worried. She smiled as if nothing had happened and handed over a cake she had bought. They sat in the living room, talking about all sorts of things, weather, prices, mutual acquaintances, just as usual. Aunt Nina brought out an old photo album again. Alina enjoyed looking at childhood pictures of her husband while Aunt Nina shared funny stories from that time. Soon, Nicholas arrived, just as Alina had expected, bringing Aunt Rita, Aunt Nina's sister, with him. It turned into a little family gathering, warm, kind, peaceful. You're such a sweetheart for coming, Aunt Nina beamed. You gave up your only day off. Nicholas told us how hard you've been working lately. I just felt like visiting, Alina smiled back. I know you haven't been feeling well. Aunt Nina lowered her eyes, as if suddenly feeling awkward. Well, of course. The woman had to pretend she was much sicker than she actually was. Also that Nicholas would keep giving her money for treatment. It must be difficult for someone as honest and decent as her. Alina's heart ached with sympathy for her husband's aunt. She wanted to help her get out of this situation as soon as possible. They stayed in the village until evening. It was already dusk when they started getting ready to leave. They drove home in separate cars. So, they didn't talk on the way, but Alina didn't want to postpone the conversation. As soon as the apartment door closed behind them, she immediately laid it all out for her husband. We need to talk, she began. Today, I was rewatching our wedding video, and one scene stood out to me. Nicholas listened carefully. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just absorbed every word. Then he asked her to show him the footage. Together, they watched the scene over and over. Nicholas furrowed his brows. Alina gently rubbed his shoulder to soothe him. Something isn't right here, Alina said again. And today, the same man was with Aunt Nina. I'm 100% sure. I got a good look at him. We'll figure it out, Nicholas nodded thoughtfully. We definitely will. Alina didn't know what her husband was planning. He never shared his plans until he had thought everything through. He had always been a man of action, not words. But Alina didn't doubt for a second Nicholas would find a way. That's just the kind of person he was. Days passed. They didn't talk about it again. Alina tried to bring it up a few times, but Nicholas kept changing the subject. She understood immediately and backed off, for now. One evening, Nicholas spoke first. I set up a camera in my aunt's yard right after you told me everything. The very next day. And not just in the yard, on the streetlights on both sides of the house too, to capture the road. And he showed up. Really? Alina's eyes shot up to her husband's. Yeah. He came to see her again today. And right after that, she called me and asked for more money for new medicine. That bastard is blackmailing her. He's draining her dry. She's already sold all her jewelry. I checked at the local pawn shop. She's probably giving him her pension too. And now, he's forcing her to lie to me for money. She's even in debt because of him. She's borrowing from neighbors for him. It's a disaster. What do we do? How do we stop this? I know who he is now. The camera caught his car's license plate. I already looked up the owner. Paulo Ortiz. Finding him won't be hard. You're going to him? Alina's voice trembled. Nicholas, this man is dangerous. He might be very dangerous. That's exactly why I'm telling you all this, where and when I'm going. You need to know. And I've already sent the camera footage to your email, just in case. I'm scared, Alina admitted. Maybe you shouldn't go? Don't worry, Nicholas pulled her close, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. First of all, I'm not going alone. Second, he's probably just a small-time scammer. Squeezing a few bucks out of an old woman. That's not exactly big-time crime. Not alone? Alina still couldn't calm down. Who are you going with? She almost regretted telling him. You know Sergio Romero, right? He works as an operative in the fraud department now. Well, unofficially, so to speak, he's accompanying me. Alina nodded. Of course, she knew Sergio. He was a close friend and former classmate of her husband. Promise me you'll be careful. Of course, don't worry. It's just a precaution. There's nothing to be afraid of. That evening, when Nicholas, accompanied by his friend Sergio, went to the apartment where Paulo was registered, Alina couldn't find a place for herself. She paced back and forth in the apartment, tried reading, watching movies, nothing helped. Even a conversation with Sandra, her close friend, brought no relief. Sandra immediately sensed that something was wrong with Alina, but she couldn't openly tell her what was happening, so she had to quickly end the conversation. An hour passed, then another. Alina called Nicholas, but he didn't answer. Naturally, this made her even more anxious. She was about to call the police when Nicholas finally called her back. Everything's fine, my love, he said. His voice even sounded cheerful. Where are you? Sergio and I are at the station. That guy, Paulo Ortiz, turned out to be quite a character, but don't worry, everything's fine. We're just finishing up the paperwork, and I'll be home soon. Alina exhaled. The most important thing was that Nicholas was alive. She had already imagined the worst, but her husband was safe and sound, and even in good spirits. It seemed like the problem was resolved. Now, curiosity was eating at her. What had happened there? What kind of paperwork was Nicholas dealing with? She wanted to know everything, especially whether this troublesome situation for Aunt Nina was finally over or not. Nicholas returned home late, tired, happy, and, it seemed, slightly drunk. He collapsed onto the couch, smiled, and winked at his wife. She was watching him expectantly, but he didn't seem in any hurry to tell her what had happened. "Well? Why are you silent?" Alina couldn't hold back. "Give me a moment to catch my breath," Nicholas smiled. "You really are sharp, noticing something like that. Amazing. Sergio said there's no point in hiding anything from a wife like you." "Then don't hide it," Alina took his words as a compliment. "Don't hide it, just tell me already. It's quite a story. Long and interesting." Nicholas got comfortable and gestured for his wife to sit down as well. "All right, listen up. Paulo grew up without a father. His mother, Pamela, gave birth to him when she was still a very young nurse. He was a blue-eyed, fair-haired boy, looking like a little angel in his childhood. Pamela had moved to the city from a village, finished her studies, and hoped to get a job in the city. But it didn't work out. She needed connections and experience. However, back in her hometown, the local clinic was looking for staff in the maternity ward. So, she had to go back home, even though she had always dreamed of a glamorous life in the city. Still, she wasn't ready to give up on her dreams. Nearly every weekend, she would go to the city for a night out, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. She was searching for her prince, handsome, wealthy, someone who would take her away into a carefree life where she wouldn't have to work or worry about making ends meet. To be honest, she didn't care much for her job. Demanding patients, strict supervisors, screaming newborns, and exhausted mothers, it was all too much. One night at a club, she met what seemed like the man of her dreams, tall, well-dressed, stylish, arriving in a luxury foreign car. Pamela noticed all of it right away. They talked, danced, and he invited her for a drive around the city. By morning, they parted ways, and the man didn't even ask for her phone number. But Pamela had hoped for something more. He had spoken such beautiful words, looked at her with admiration. It seemed like he was enchanted by the young village nymph, and everything was going to be just as she had dreamed. But it didn't happen. He simply dropped her off at the bus station. Pamela had told him she needed to catch the morning bus, so he chose that route. He didn't offer to take her back to the village, didn't ask for her number. She was caught off guard. This wasn't how she imagined their farewell, and she didn't have the initiative to change it. He left, and that was it. She never saw him again. She tried looking for him, went back to that club, asked around. No one knew anything about him. The bartender even said he had never seen the guy before. It seemed like he had ended up in the club by chance. Maybe he wasn't even from the city, just passing through. Most likely, he was a traveler. Pamela was upset for a little while, but soon she returned to her fun-filled life, work, parties, clubs, and searching for a new prince. Then she found out she was pregnant. Everything pointed to the father being that same man in the expensive car. The young nurse was devastated. She had never planned on becoming a mother. First of all, she was too young. She wanted to have fun, not take care of a baby. Second, her financial situation was unstable. She had no family left. Both her parents had passed away when she was still young. She lived alone in the family house, which needed repairs. Her salary barely covered her own expenses, and now she had to care for a child, too. There was no one to help her. And third, Pamela saw firsthand how difficult motherhood was. Every day at work, she witnessed struggling mothers and screaming babies, and she had no desire to go through that herself. Her colleagues talked her out of terminating the pregnancy. They promised to support her. A doctor, Senora Flores, explained the risks of the procedure and even offered to be the child's godmother. The head doctor promised a generous bonus to help her get by while she was unable to work. And so, Pamela became a mother. The baby was beautiful, huge blue eyes, delicate eyebrows, golden curls. He looked like a little cherub from an old Christmas postcard. Everyone predicted a modeling career for him. Pamela enjoyed the compliments, and, to her surprise, she felt a deep affection for her baby. Her colleagues, neighbors, and friends supported her. People gave her brand new, high-quality baby clothes, not second-hand rags. They even helped babysit. And Senora Flores, true to her word, secured a spot for Paulo in daycare so that Pamela could return to work as soon as possible. They lived modestly but comfortably. They didn't have luxuries, but they also didn't struggle. Paulo always had what he needed. Pamela accepted her circumstances and stopped dreaming about a glamorous life. But as Paulo grew up, he became convinced that he deserved more. A smart and handsome young man like him shouldn't be stuck in a small town. He belonged in a big city. Maybe the capital or another famous metropolis. That's where he saw his future. He dreamed of brand-name clothes and shoes, a luxury car, a spacious, stylish apartment. He wanted to go to clubs, date beautiful women. But his mother kept pushing him to study, something he had no interest in. As a teenager, Paulo often argued with her about his future. Pamela insisted he needed an education, a job, hard work. Paulo disagreed. He believed work was for fools. He was sure that someone as smart and attractive as he was would find an easy way to success. And so, he started looking for it. Back in school, Paulo got involved with a supposedly legitimate company. The job of high school students was to call people and persuade them to follow a link that he would send during the conversation. His supervisors provided brief training. A man whom Paulo had never seen, only heard over the phone, taught him how to handle different people in various situations. He explained how to structure a conversation so that the person would click the link. The introduction varied. Sometimes Paulo introduced himself as a law enforcement officer, other times as a tax inspector or a representative of a phone service provider. There were countless approaches, all depending on who answered the call. It turned out that Paulo had a natural talent for persuasion and an intuitive sense for people. He almost always knew which buttons to press to get them to click the link. His supervisors praised him and, most importantly, increased his salary. What happened to those who fell for Paulo's tricks, he neither knew nor cared to know, just as he had no interest in who his supervisors really were or what their true goals were. What mattered was that money kept flowing into his account, and his earnings depended on the number of clicks. So, Paulo worked hard. Then, one day, two men approached Paulo right at the school gates. One was in a police uniform, the other in civilian clothes. The one in plainclothes showed his ID. He was a major. They took Paulo to the station. Later, a frantic Pamela burst in. The police had uncovered the fraud network. The organizers and supervisors managed to escape responsibility. They couldn't even be identified. But Paulo? He was found quickly. The only thing that saved him was his age. He was still a minor. He wouldn't turn 18 until the following month. His mother had to give up her meager savings to pay for a lawyer, the money she had set aside for Paulo's university education. She had always known her son wouldn't get in on his own, but she still wanted to provide him with an education. So, she had opened a savings account. But now, the money was gone. In the end, Paulo got off with just a scare, a serious one, but still just a scare. He laid low, realizing how dangerous such schemes could be. But he never gave up on his dream of getting rich quickly. After finishing school, he didn't apply anywhere. His mother begged him to reconsider, even cried. She was willing to take out a loan to pay for his tuition at a private university. But Paulo, who now considered himself an adult and free, had completely different plans. He wasn't going to waste time on education. At first, he worked as a waiter in a bar, observing people and making connections. Then, for a while, he became the lover of a wealthy woman over 40. That's when he truly experienced the luxury he had always dreamed of. But the idyll was shattered by the woman's husband. Paulo found himself in serious trouble and barely managed to escape. He survived on odd jobs, but stayed out of legal trouble. He had learned his lesson at 17. All of this brought in some income, but Paulo wanted more. And the fact that his dreams weren't materializing infuriated him. Occasionally, he visited his mother. Pamela was always happy to see him. The family home in the small town was a safe haven where Paulo could rest, regain his strength, eat well, and sleep in a warm, cozy bed. A perfect pit stop. His mother worried about him, about how unsettled he seemed. Pamela pitied Paulo and somehow blamed herself for how he had turned out. And Paulo masterfully played on that guilt. She gave him her last money, forgave him everything, supported him emotionally and financially. One day, during one of these visits home, when Paulo was completely broke and desperately needed cash, he overheard a conversation. His mother assumed he was still asleep after coming home late the night before. A neighbor had come over, and they were sitting in the kitchen, drinking tea and chatting. This happened often. They were talking about a woman named Heloisa. Paulo vaguely remembered her. She was his age, a girl from a nearby street. She had miraculously gotten pregnant. She and her husband had been trying for years, and finally, it happened. But the twins were born prematurely and didn't survive. That's what the women were discussing in the kitchen, sighing, sympathizing with Heloisa. Just like that woman on my shift, Pamela said. Paulo was about 5 then. I remember it like it was yesterday. The one who lost her daughter in childbirth? Yes, her. I remember that case. People talked about it a lot. I was on duty when she gave birth. Such a wonderful woman. Her name's Nina. I know her. She's from a nearby village. She had been married for a long time. They had dreamed of a child, but it just never happened. Then, finally, a miracle, she got pregnant. But you can't cheat nature. Her age, plus health issues. She gave birth too early. The baby was too weak. There was no chance. Just like Heloisa. So similar. Poor woman. Is it true she lost her mind after what happened? Yes, for a while. At first, she accused us of selling her baby to a wealthy family. Can you imagine? She seriously believed that. Stress does strange things to people, the neighbor said wisely. Of course, it does. And she couldn't accept what happened. It's understandable. What happened to her after? She was discharged. They say she believed for a long time that her daughter was still alive. She even tried searching. And then her husband left her for another woman. That woman got pregnant, so he ran off to her. It was another blow for Nina. That's probably why she clung to the idea that her baby survived. She wanted to find her daughter. Poor thing. Yeah. But then time passed, and something else happened. Her sister's family died, leaving behind a little boy. Nina took him in. That probably saved her from completely losing her mind. What a sad story. Very. Nina still lives in that village. Her nephew grew up, turned into a good man, moved to the city, and earns well. Paulo listened carefully, and a plan began forming in his mind. What if he found this Nina? Tested the waters. Played on her old certainty that her daughter had survived. This was a goldmine. If he told her that the child had lived and fed her bits of information over time, he could drain money from her. So that's exactly what Paulo did. He dug deeper into Aunt Nina's story, worked out the details, and one day, he showed up at her house with a sensational claim. He knew where her daughter was, now a grown woman. It turned out to be shockingly easy. Aunt Nina eagerly believed the lie he fed her. She handed over her money without question. And when she ran out of savings, she faked a worsening heart condition and started borrowing from her nephew and neighbors. That was exactly what Paulo had counted on. He knew Nicholas lived in the city and was well off. Of course, he wouldn't refuse his beloved aunt money for medication. Paulo had found himself a steady income source. The money wasn't millions, but it was enough to live on. Aunt Nina was terrified of losing contact with her daughter and never told anyone what was going on. She just kept finding ways to get more money. Paulo's appetite grew. He felt truly happy. He had finally figured out how to make money. He even started making bigger plans. Why not find more Aunt Ninas? Why not make a business out of this? But one evening, the police showed up at Paulo's apartment. He denied everything, of course, but they had evidence, audio recordings, video footage. And, in the end, Aunt Nina testified. She finally accepted the truth that her daughter had never survived. And she came to terms with it. Wow! Alina exclaimed after listening to her husband. That was resolved so quickly. Well, technically, the case isn't closed yet. It's only just begun, but it's already clear that Paulo has no chance of getting away with this. And Aunt Nina? Did she really give her testimony? Yes. They brought her to the station and explained everything to her. Where is she now? Alina asked anxiously. She understood that all of this must have taken a serious toll on the elderly woman. She was surely in terrible condition. She's all right, but under medical supervision. Her blood pressure spiked. Not surprising, really, her heart isn't in the best shape. Even a strong, young person would be shaken by something like this. So, they admitted her to the hospital as a precaution. She's being monitored by the doctors. I'll bring her home tomorrow. She'll stay with us for a couple of days. You don't mind, do you? Of course not, don't be silly. And you, my love, did an amazing thing. You saved my aunt. You helped stop a scammer. Paulo won't get a long sentence, but he's under investigation now. He won't be running his schemes around here anymore, he'll think twice. Yeah. And to think it all started just because I decided to rewatch our wedding on my day off. Nicholas smiled and pulled his wife into an embrace.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.